Your story deals with a subculture of heavy metal music that some feel is sending a dangerous message to your kids.
The forces of evil on the dark side of devil rock.
And I want to talk tonight about the devil and demons and witches and wizards.
And we just mix it up with hardcore and aggression and come out with something we think's an original sound.
Loud, fast, heavy, you know.
Well, what do you got?
What do you got?
Welcome back to Riff Worship, where we search out all things the riff. Joining me today, as always, is my elusive co-host, the one, the only, the legendary Austin Paulson. I am Dylan Adams. How are you, bud?
Elusive, man. I'm a sneaky boy.
Yeah, you're like an Igor kind of character, just walking around, just in the midst, in the wings.
I certainly got the look for it.
What happened?
I'm doing good, man. It's been a busy couple weeks for us. We've got a lot of things in the works, which we can allude to later, but we've also been busy listening to a ton of music. Today's album, I feel like we kind of connected over this early on. This release came out perhaps maybe like maybe a year into us really knowing each other. And I think we're pretty like-minded. Yeah. I think this was definitely a record that sticks out in my mind as like, okay, I think this guy gets it. Like, this is something that, newer band, or at least like newer to us, or newer to me rather. And, it was exactly right up my alley, and we connected on it pretty early on. So I don't know what your relationship is like with this record in particular. But I'll let you kick things off, man. What can you tell me about this album we're talking about today?
So the album we're obviously talking about is Watain's 2013, I'm going to call it an opus, The Wild Hunt, very divisive album. This band is probably more known for its output prior to 2013, with albums such as Lawless Darkness and Sworn to the Dark, which were the two albums that I became familiar with this band on, mainly being Lawless Darkness, which was the album preceding this one. This album's an interesting one, right? Especially in this subgenre, which is black metal, which is known for some very interesting topics, interesting subject matter, interesting characters, a lot of things. I think it's now more known on any sort of facet with the internet music world or the internet metal world of like, this is some of the more cringeworthy music that's out there. Is this form of music, and it's a bummer to think that, because there is some really good music in this subgenre. But this album in particular is an interesting one, because this might be the closest to maybe like arena rock, maybe, that black metal has ever hit. This album came out in the at the end, actually midsummer 2013. Matter of fact, when this episode airs, it will be the 10th anniversary of this album. The exact date, August 16th, 2013, when this album came out.
We kind of, as I mentioned, connected on this record kind of early on, and not that we've like covered a lot of anniversaries on this show, but I felt like we wanted to cover a more like modern contemporary record that we kind of laud for being such a, like you said, divisive is a good word, and which is kind of crazy to say, because really, there's so many unique qualities and characteristics to this album as far as like songwriting goes, the inclusion of like really so many different subgenres across metal in general. But you're right. I feel like, the band's previous works are definitely kind of up there in there, we're like, all right, if a fan came up to you and was like, all right, what albums do you need to check out? I don't know if they would necessarily lead with this record, but
Yeah.
I think I would. I mean, and maybe I'm biased because really, I am familiar with Lawless Darkness, but I want to say I probably got really into this band through this record in particular.
Absolutely.
Lawless Darkness was a huge hit, like critically and like commercially. I want to say it earned them like a Swedish Grammy, like in like 2011.
They went gold in Sweden because of that record as well.
There was a single, "Reaping Death." That, I guess. So that was it was a big deal, and I know they had some performances that get noted in kind of some of my research of like they Watain and Bloodstock, of course. And that record essentially got them signed to Century Media after, so which cemented this album. I'm like, all right, this is going to be kind of our debut for the label.
Yeah. So the Lawless Darkness album is, I remember, you're familiar with Bowling Green as well as I am, Bowling Green, Kentucky. The mall had a FYE for a lot of years in it. Maybe even one of the last ones in the state. I remember going in there, picking up the album. Since it was released on Season of Mist, I don't know if it was considered an import or maybe it was harder to get stuff into that label. It was an extremely expensive CD. I think I paid $18 for it, but I knew I wanted it. Like, oh yeah, I got to have this record. And I just remember listening to it, and I listened to it a lot when it came out, being a very long record. This one's not necessarily a short album, but in comparison, that album was far longer than this one. That album was so far in the grandiose scale of these big, long, atmospheric kind of songs. Whereas this one, I'll make a comparison here in a minute once we get to talking about it, of this album. But this one felt more direct with the songs. I mean, it opens up with kind of an ambient instrumental track, kind of like setting the case, and then it kicks into that first track. And if I remember right, I don't know what the instrument is called, but it's not a cowbell, but it looks like a cowbell, and it's got like an attachment to it, and they pull it and it rattles. And I think that is in the first song.
There is like a lot of, you can hear like an accordion in that first, like instrumental kind of track. I want to say there's like a fiddle as well being played. I mean, it's very symphonic. A lot of this record has like, you have even kind of towards the end of that first track, there's like almost like correct me if I'm wrong. There's certainly like a drum, but it sounds more of like a timpani.
Yeah, you're right.
So it's like, it's rumbling. It's like, kind of to push this theme perhaps of like that rumbling sky, kind of like I know there are some traditional, maybe Nordic themes with the wild hunt, in culture, within Northern European cultures, but you certainly get the vibe through this first track. It definitely sets the stage with, it fades in, there's clean guitars, there's chimes, there's like more traditional instruments. But that rumbling kind of drum track kind of reminded me of that Celtic Frost record, almost like the big one, the symphonic one.
Yep. There's with the kind of the instrumentation on this album, there are some nods, maybe indirectly to I always go back to Neurosis with kind of the tribal drums and like Through Silver and Blood and anything like that. There's these chants that are on the record too that really make me think of that. Maybe even, and I'm sure there's no influence, or they'll never admit that there's influence of this, but like some like Sepultura-esque things, but it may be more so rooted in the Swedish Norwegian kind of mythos of this band.
Right.
This album with all of its, as you said, with its vast symphonic instrumentation in it, it does not sound like a symphonic black metal album by any means. It does not sound like a Dimmu Borgir or a Cradle of Filth or any of the kind of, those are just two larger names for this subgenre. And those are typically when, kind of, I don't want to like be a gatekeeper, but when it comes to this subgenre, when people first step into it, I think the big three bands that people pay attention to when they're first getting into black metal are probably Behemoth, Dimmu Borgir, and Cradle of Filth. And then they go from there as easy gateway bands. And then you get into the more substantial kind of area of that. And when it comes to symphonics, you think of like the big keyboards, the big orchestras behind them. And this isn't that, but there's just enough instrumentation that would be more catered to an orchestra or a symphony that is on here that it gives it its own character. This album has a weird vibe to it. And it's funny that in my research, I found this comparison that I was about to make. It has a Western pirate, kind of like outlaw, like no pun intended, this weird touring vibe. It sounds like to me the same vibe as some of the lyrical influences on like the fucking Black Album, which is one of the comparisons I saw, which is like how like just that we're on tour. We've been on tour for 3+ years, whatever it may have been. We're also a band that is somehow getting larger in this subgenre that has a ceiling to it. And we're playing these massive festivals. And we're doing this constant touring. And, we're experiencing all these weird things when it comes to touring, from playing smaller venues to these massive stages in Europe. And we're catching one controversial band.
Yes.
I mean, you name it, they've done it. There's all sorts of stories about this band. And the biggest one is their stage show, with blood, with gore, with animals and so on and so forth.
One that came directly after the release of
Brooklyn
this album.
show.
Yeah. Which I'm sure we'll get to, but you're completely right. The theme of, again, not to literally lift a song title from the album, but they are essentially outlaws. Writing for 3 such years after the release of the previous album, and then you're going on these kind of extended tours, the United States, Japan, Australia, and you really are forced to write out on the road. That's your home. You're basically just traveling. And that definitely makes an impression on this album with songs like Outlaw. I definitely get that vibe from They Rode On, which
absolutely
you mentioned, like kind of a Western thing. I have in my notes, I literally wrote like spaghetti Western vibes almost.
Absolutely.
Definitely kind of, maybe not a direct comparison to like Ennio Morricone, but like certainly that I get that vibe. Like almost like I would almost hear like a cowboy's belt or something rustling in the in the dirt. It's all there for sure. And even like to kind of continue on this theme of traveling and making this on the road. I mean, they literally recorded in several studios to make this album. Most of the time you might just use one, get comfortable with the space, but perhaps for just the out of necessity, you have to record in multiple studios over the course of this album. So I think that's a very important point to make for sure.
So it's like the lyric in Wherever I May Roam, the road becomes my bride kind of situation. Like, I know that at this point, 30 years on, is kind of a cheesy line, but it's I'm assuming any sort of period of time of a band that tours really hard or is on the road for extended periods of time probably feels that way, where everything's kind of a Groundhog Day, or what curveball is going to be thrown at us next. And with this band, I'm sure a plethora of curveballs were thrown at them, and this band, especially in this subgenre, to make a statement of, all right, we have just put out our final release on Season of Mist Records.
Mm-hmm.
Again, a very lauded, very great record label that has put out and still continues to put out great albums, great releases. They decided to step up a little bit and go with, all right, we've signed with Century Media, which at that time and to this day is still one of the largest metal labels on the planet. Probably would give them larger distribution throughout the globe. And it definitely seems and feels like Century Media put a lot of backing behind this band during this with promotion. Because I remember magazine adverts of the album cover for up until the album came out and even thereafter. I remember the tours being promoted. I remember, I believe they were on the very first incarnation of the Decibel festival or the Decibel tour. I think they were on the very first.
I know they were featured on like the August or September issue that year.
Mhm.
I'd have to dig it up, but I would have to look at that. But that makes sense if they're promoting it. I mean, I would feel like that magazine certainly has promoted this band, whether directly through tours or just like, you gotta check this record out over the years for sure. I kind of wanted to touch on, again, through research, obviously the Wild Hunt is just such a great name, but like the lore that surrounds it is really just kind of all encompassing and spans several cultures. And just to, maybe look at a wiki for the definition or perhaps its origins, it's definitely very prominent in Northern European cultures, and I guess features a chase led by a mythological figure, often escorted by a ghostly or supernatural group of hunters in pursuit. So I mean, and again, I mean, I've seen Odin thrown around in this. I've seen like perhaps even like King Arthur included in a version of this type of lore, but very interesting. And so it definitely, when it opens with that first track, I immediately feel like I am transported to the cover of that record. This like kind of very, again, kind of a more traditionally like very ancient looking album cover with like gold and jewels, and like there's a table with the skulls, the crown. I feel like I'm in that oil painting of the cover. Like I'm immediately brought to that point. So I feel like it's certainly successful in bringing around that theme directly.
What I read on the artwork is you're absolutely correct. And that it does, you hear the music and it transports you almost into the artwork. It transports you into the story, into the lore, into what's going on.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you mentioned that's an oil painting. It's an oil painting mixed with who knows what, but it says, I believe it's stated like physical elements, or I'm assuming there's some sort of bodily fluid in the paint itself, the way it was depicted, blood, whatever it could be. But the story behind it, and this is where a lot of people kind of get, kind of start to make fun of black metal, is a lot of the guys take themselves very seriously in their creation of what is art. And this is supposed to depict one of the shrines of their band.
Oh, okay.
And I don't, there's not really much else I found on that, but I found an interview with the singer Eric Danielson of this, and he depicted that. And, I get it. Upon listening to the record, it's like, okay, I completely get this. This whole band has a vibe around it. This band was one of the bands that scared me the first time I saw them, because during that, is it the Sworn to the Dark album cycle? Like there are some great photo shots of them, and there's some, Sworn to the Dark. Okay. There's some great photo shots of them like covered in viscera and like eyes rolled in the back of their head. And that album came out, I think, in like 2007. So I saw them not very long after that, maybe even in a Decibel magazine. And it terrified me. It was like the first time I saw Behemoth as a kid. Terrified me. They just looked absolutely monstrous. And they looked like a feral pack of like rabid dogs when I saw them. And it's like, this is horrifying. I have to know more. And there's still a vibe to that with this album. There's still this like ferocity, but deep down, this band is, they wear their influences on their sleeves. It sounds like maybe a little more rudimentary in black metal, maybe more primal is the word I'm looking for. Yeah. They definitely wear their Bathory influences.
Absolutely.
Dissection is the big band that this band has ties to it.
Oh, really?
Dissection. Yes. Eric played bass not only on many of the Watain albums, but he played bass on the last 3 Dissection shows before. I think his name was John. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it right, before John killed himself. But they also covered, they covered a Dissection song as like a B-side to this album, or maybe it was a song that just had lyrics written by John from Dissection. I could be incorrect in that. But they definitely wear their influences on their sleeves. However, there are some influences on here, at least that I interpret, that I don't think a lot of maybe the true black metal fans would truly love. Anytime I listen to this album, even back then when it came out, I was like, oh, this sounds and plays like Chinese Democracy.
Okay, interesting.
Or not Chinese Democracy, Use Your Illusion.
Okay.
This plays like those two albums. I'm like, this big grandiose thing. Great production. This thing has fantastic production.
It's amazing.
Century Media chipped in some money for this. The songs to me are well crafted. They're longer, but they don't meander to me. They all kind of hit the point of it. I mean, there are definitely some songs on here that maybe if they came out now, you'd hear them and go like, that's, it's a little more accepted now if they release something like this now. They wrote on. That's the song that always gets kind of crapped on with this album.
Which is wild because it's their highest streamed song. Like if you go to their Spotify or their Apple Music, I'm sure it's at the top. And, I can't blame it. I mean, really, I can understand why. I mean, I understand why someone would say it. I think it's stupid that you would, because it is such a well-crafted song. And that was the one that in particular that gave me very much a like outlaw kind of country Western, spaghetti Western rather, feel to it. But yeah, it features clean guitars and vocals. And get over yourself, man. It's a damn good song. And I mean, it has wonderful guitar harmonies and a kind of this epic solo. There's some guest vocals featured by Anna Norberg at the end of the track, which I believe, just kind of digging her around, she also did some guest vocals for a song on In Solitude's The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, on a song called Poison, Blessed, and Burned, which again,
there you go.
They'll come back up in this conversation, but it is, they're trying something different. And I think they did it really well. I mean, really, I can never fault a band for at least like trying to do something different, explore the boundaries of your sound, challenge yourself. I think they're certainly doing that on every song here. I mean, I think there is a clear effort on their part, and they literally, and it shows 3 years, and you have to do it on the road. I'm sure it was like some of the most emotionally taxing, work and writing process, recording process for an album that this band had done since this at this point. But there's a clear evidence to me that like literally every little piece of this album, every song was just so meticulous, and that there's layers, starts and stops. Tempo changing. I mean, you look at the first track after Night Vision comes in and kind of, sets precedent. De Profundis. Excuse me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Probably going to be doing that a lot this episode. But there's really like this effortless transition from that opening track, and then you just get punched in the fucking chest by that, like literally like an explosion, like somebody kicked down a door. It is insane. It's, you have this kind of calm, like almost more ambient, like symphonic thing that we're mentioning. And then right out of the gate, it's like a punch in the goddamn chops, like fast, intense. There's blast. But it's not so jarring that it doesn't make sense for this band or this record.
There's some wild tempo changes on this album too. Some wild tempo changes. It's black metal, so there's definitely not like to kind of go back to our Cryptopsy episode. There's no gravity blast on this record. No. I mean, this is probably straightforward blast or even like a European style blast. But there's such a quick tempo change in a couple of the tracks too, that it's pretty wild, because black metal is always viewed as this very primal, borderline sloppy, kind of musical genre. And it's knowing that a band can take itself seriously enough that they're going to go, okay, we need to hone our craft, but also this shows what a band sounds like after being on the road for 3 years and playing that many shows, playing those songs, no matter how difficult each night, going through the different trials and tribulations that this band did during this period. I mean, we've talked about a little bit with recording with multiple studios and the difficulty of riding on the road, recording while on the road. This has gone on record as being the most difficult recording process of any album that they did. And that by the time they were done, it was just like, God, it's over. Matter of fact, the last song written is the last song on the record, Holocaust Dawn. And I believe Eric went on record as saying, yeah, that song surmised everything on the album. The writing process of when we got done with that track and recorded it was like, it's finally done. It's over with. You know, it's a record they put a lot of work into, for sure. This was not a record of like maybe shooting from the hip. I'm sure there was an aspect of that, but they put work into this to make sure every song played out this way. These songs were very well crafted. You know, it's not just rolling in with, you know, hey, let's play this riff for 6 minutes here. It's very well crafted in the sense of heavy metal, extreme metal songwriting. But as you and I are pretty prevalent about talking about this subject, there are hooks all over this record.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
There's a track at the back end of the record, and I believe it's Outlaw in particular, that has this great kind of vocal hook in it at the back half of it.
Yes.
And when I put this record back on for the first time in a few years, a couple weeks ago, it all came back. It all flooded back of just like, man, this is a great record. And I just remember you and I sitting down together going like, why does everybody hate this record?
I played it a lot. Obviously I do radio now, but at the time of this release, I was doing a college radio station in Western Kentucky. And I remember playing some of these songs, like Black Flames March was definitely on there.
Yep.
Outlaw for sure stuck out, not just for the song, but they had the wonderful video for it, which I believe was perhaps like their first music video as a band. I could be wrong on that, but at least it's the first one that I remember seeing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's to the credit of like Century Media.
Yeah. It was so well produced. I mean, it starts out with that kind of chant, which again, always like stuck out of my mind. When we were about to do this record, I could remember that opening chant of Outlaw like very clearly in my head. And the video is very grotesque. I mean, God damn, it looks like there's like a fucking colonoscopy happening. And then there's like different footages of like Tribe and Tribe's there's like a ritualistic aspect of the video, and then the band is performing live. It looks like it's almost like filmed on like an old VHS, camera. But there's so many different elements to this band that made it a success to me. It definitely stood out as like, oh, wow, okay. I mean, I'm kind of familiar with this band, but clearly they're trying to make a statement with this record. So for anyone, it was kind of odd and honestly to see the divisiveness and the kind of, I don't want to say like mixed reviews, but like, I mean, there were definitely like opposing sides between fans. Like, what is this record? Clean vocals. Like, what's going on here? What are they doing? And I'm like, what do you mean they're writing good songs?
And that's the thing is this album, and I'm sure they already had these influences. They just show a little bit more on this record. Doom metal influence hit me immediately. There are traditional heavy metal influences on here. And there's some progressive kind of rock leanings. I don't want to say progressive metal because in today's instance of progressive metal, it's a different thing entirely. But there's some progressive rock influences to this, which I'm sure these guys were probably grew up listening to old school new wave of British heavy metal records, the early wave of black metal, death metal. I'm sure they listened to like prog rock to an extent.
Yeah, I mean, with like you kind of mentioned the Black Album as like being a comparison, at least just in how the band's trajectory went. I mean, you think about that band in general, with people like, what is the Black? And I'm like, yeah, these guys loved hard rock music. Like, they grew up in a time when that was king. Of course, that's going to come through. Like, they probably just wanted to be in a hard rock band, and they
Yeah.
accomplished that. So with what you're saying here, with some of these more like traditionally minded songs, like you listen to The Child Must Die, that screams to me like a more like a heavy metal, like a more traditional, like Judas Priest kind of song. I mean, there's even at one point, I think it's on the song All That May Bleed, it opens with this kind of like palm muted, almost like phaser like opening that just immediately transported me to like a Judas Priest type of like opening for a song. So it's all there. It's absolutely all there.
The traditional influences are here, more so maybe even than the rest of their catalog.
Yeah.
You know, the stuff that preceded this album and the stuff that came after the album are definitely a little more rooted in kind of that violent black metal sound that they're known for, and done very well, and still well-crafted songs. Like anytime a new Watain record comes out, I'm from the South, everyone. Anytime a new Watain record comes out, I'm still really excited to hear it. You know, I don't need it to sound like the Wild Hunt, but I know there's still going to be aspects that this record changed them. This record changed them going forward, and I need to hear those aspects. You know, there's going to be chances taken on their new material that this album allowed them to make. It allowed them to step outside of that black metal box and go, hey, you know, we're still a black metal band, but this is what we're doing. We're going to add these influences to it. And you're right. This album is full of songs. That's the key here. You know, in many of the albums that we've talked about, and even in our Nate Garrett episode that we did, we talked about, yes, riffs are a big part of what we do and a big part of why we do these things and why we have this podcast. But the songs are going to be memorable. You got to have good songs too. And debatably, they did it on here. They did it on this record. You know, we go back to, it was kind of mixed with the reaction of this record. I don't give a lot of leeway to like music critics or anything like that, because it's, you know, it's kind of a weird thing. But the critics were very positive about this album, oddly enough. You know, they even called it's even been called by certain critics Watain's rock album, which, yeah, absolutely. Sure is. But it's remarkable to read that and not laugh, going like, it's a black metal record. It's just a little bit more of a, it's a little bit more refined. I don't want to say polished, because the production sounds good, but it's not glossy.
Yeah. And we were kind of talking about this leading into the recording for this episode, but you kind of have, it was a interesting point that you made. There's two albums that kind of came out that are doing different things. You have The Wild Hunt, and then kind of at the time of recording this, they've announced like 10th anniversary as well of like Sunbather, Death Heaven Sunbather. They're going to be doing like a remixed, remastered version of the album. They're going to be going on this kind of multi-date tour to celebrate its 10th anniversary. And so, you know, those are two completely different records.
Absolutely.
But they are kind of like taking from that traditional black metal thing and doing kind of their own thing with it, which, you know, for whatever reason has always been kind of viewed as this taboo thing. You can't mess with the, you know, you can't mess with the sauce. Don't add too much salt. Don't do this or that. But I mean, really, it is very interesting what was going on at this point as far as like, you know, the genre. I mean, shoegaze has certainly been like a, especially now, this like kind of black gaze thing has become certainly popular, probably largely in part because of Sunbather. But I remember when that record came out and hearing it for the first time and seeing it appear almost like, or at least the cover in like Apple commercials or and people from my high school who had probably never been into black metal were like, this is like the record of the year. I'm like, but where were you when you were like making fun of me for liking Mayhem or, you know what I mean? Like, so it was kind of an interesting thing. But
with that being in mind, let's see, this album came out in August. And I am not entirely sure when Sunbather came out in 2013, but
It
I
was
do
like
remember it coming
January, perhaps.
out. So it was early 2013. So all right, you've got to it now. Maybe more rooted in that kind of core black metal sound. Less than 6 months, maybe a little over 6 months later, Behemoth the Satanist came out.
Oh, I correct myself. It was released in June.
Okay, so it
Sunbather
came out
released in
right
June.
around the time of this
Yeah.
album then. They both within a few weeks.
Yeah.
But Behemoth the Satanist came out in February 2014.
Man.
Now, that album is a great album. Drastic departure from their prior material, which was more kind of a technical death metal kind of vibe. But they took a lot of chances on that album, and that was a return to form. And that album was lauded as being a fantastic thing. Fans and critics alike loved that album.
Yeah.
But then you go back 6 months prior where you've got Watain, taking these chances and these steps, and, the fan base was really divisive on it. You had people that loved it, people that hated it. Even looking at some of the reviews online from like fans on Metal Archives, you've got a couple of them that are like 80 to 90%, and some of them that are as low as like 40. It's very divisive. But yet the Satanist is in the same vibe, and it's just loved at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, you got a song like "O Father, O Satan, O Son" on the end of that album that was used in the Righteous Gemstones.
Was it really?
Yes,
I
it
haven't
was.
started it yet.
I believe it's the end of season 1 or season 2. There's a choir version of it. It's remarkable.
That's hilarious.
But you look at this album, which I'll say this kind of gets forgotten about. This album kind of got thrown to the wayside. It was almost viewed as like, well, we're going to forget that ever existed. But why? Why? Is it because this band was so rooted in that traditional kind of black metal mentality that its fan base was just going to poo-poo all over this thing? Whereas like Behemoth had already flirted with like, hey, we're already digging into death metal territory. This is an easier transition. And maybe it's because this album was such a drastic departure from the album before it. I've always, in my head, had a weird vibe of if there's too long in between an album, right? Like say a band takes 4 years or 6 years in between a record, right? And from that prior record to the record that comes out at the end of the 6 years, if it's such a drastic departure, they missed an album in between.
Right.
They missed that album to help bridge the gap. I mean, this was a 3-year run. That's about typical for an album cycle. So they didn't really miss anything. It's arguable too that some critics and some fans think this was a cash grab to usher in a new crowd or to help further the band's career. Could have been. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Who knows? But how can you fault a band for wanting to do that, to make a career out of something they enjoy doing and has become a passion? No band started because they didn't want to at least have some sort of notoriety. We can say we're all egoless. Every human being has an ego. We all do to an extent. There's a great Lemmy quote that, people were saying they sold out after the first record. And he was like, who cares? He's like, I didn't get into this just to satisfy you. I got into this for, the typical Lemmy things, girls, drugs, and booze, that kind of thing. And, there's an aspect to that you can take and apply to extreme metal too. Like, yeah, you get into this music when you're younger because it's an outlet and you want to feel accepted, but you also start to go, man, people like our stuff.
Yeah.
I can go on tour. I can experience these things. I can do these things. I can play Watain. I can play Bloodstock to the most people I've ever played for in my entire life. And now I've got this album that's full of these songs that I've said this a lot on the podcast that plays to the back of the crowd.
Yep.
That means the guy who got there last, that maybe is only into like arena bands of this world, can enjoy it as much as the guy that's probably in the middle of the crowd wearing the trench coat and like only likes basement dwelling black metal, like from the States. You can like both forms. You can like this. I mean, that's the great thing about kind of music is there really are no rules. You can do whatever you want, but we put these rules on ourselves, and put these confinements on ourselves, and we put these ceilings on ourselves. And with this album, this was, at least in my interpretation, the band going, hey, fuck that. We're going to see what we can do with influences other than Bathory, Venom, Mayhem, and Dissection.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it was certainly a success in that way. Like we've been talking about, I mean, there was certainly a goal in mind, and I think they definitely combined all of these more traditional influences with outside influences. The people thought so too. I mean, just kind of looking at some numbers, I think it sold just under like 3,000 copies in the United States within its first week.
That's a big deal.
Best-selling album in their home country of Sweden.
Number 1 there.
Yeah, so it was their highest selling and highest chart debut to date. And yeah, I mean, what more could you ask for? At least to be supported in your own country in that way.
Yeah. It's their only US Billboard 200 debut. It debuted at number 58. It's the only album that debuted in the top 200. The any albums after had been in like, I think maybe the Heat Seekers area, anything like that.
The other cool thing, you kind of mentioned like promotional aspects of this third century media. Obviously, there's the video. Obviously, they were on the cover of multiple publications, Terrorizer, Decibel, all the like. One of the cool things that I read was that there was like a bootleg edition released like the week before.
500 copies.
And it was literally just a white sleeve hand stamp. And it went out to kind of like a certain specific amount of independent record stores rather. So that's a cool aspect of this. And that you can afford to do that, right? Now that you have the backing of somebody like Century Media. Another great part of the promotional part of this record was the tour, which,
oh man,
what if I could have been,
oh my God,
a little bit more hip to what was going on around this record, perhaps, to be the fly on the wall for this tour, this US tour, with not only do you have Wild Hunt, Watain, you have Tribulation, and you also have In Solitude, which did Sister come out around this time as well?
I think Sister came out, let's take a look here, maybe a couple years later, maybe even 2016, because I believe Sister is their last record.
Sister is their last record. Went out on top, man.
So yeah, this would have been, Sister came out around the same time. You're right.
That's crazy.
Their last record. So Tribulation were in between their albums The Horror and Children of the Night. So Children of the Night was the album that changed that band, in which we're probably going to have multiple episodes on that band because of how important they've become. But I mean, when you look at this lineup and you go, Jesus, like what a tour.
Right. And I mean, yeah, obviously In Solitude, also a Swedish band, Tribulation, also based in Sweden.
I'm certain.
So really, you have guys that obviously have a connection there. I want to say, a member of Watain was in Tribulation for a hot second. I would have to look at them and tell them on that. But they clearly all know each other. If you're coming out around the same time, tour together. And so you have this album, Wild Hunt. You have In Solitude's, perhaps their opus as well. I would have loved to have seen a tour like this.
So, not to cut you off, but the Decibel magazine tour I alluded to earlier happened in 2012. Here's the lineup for that. This was prior to this album coming out, obviously almost a full year and a half. Behemoth was the headliner.
Ooh.
Watain, The Devil's Blood, which is another Swedish band that was a big deal around this time. In Solitude opened.
Wow. There you go.
I mean, you've got,
would have been incredible.
Yeah.
Because I've seen a couple. I know we went together to see the Carcass, Exhumed, Noisome,
Obituary
tour.
but I don't think that was a Decibel. That wasn't a Decibel tour, but Decibel sponsored it.
Okay. I did see the Decibel tour from a few years ago that featured Obituary, Municipal Waste.
Yep.
I believe, who else was on that?
I've got it pulled up right here.
Spirit World, I think was the opener on
Enforced,
that.
Spirit World, Gatecreeper.
Yes, that's right. I saw a fight happen like before Gatecreeper even started playing. There was a fight in Joliet, Illinois, at the Forge. So that's fun.
That's fitting.
Yeah, why not? But again, just to kind of these great tour packages. Obviously, Decibel, we're big fans. We've been longtime subscribers to that magazine, and probably likely how I found out about this band in general. But yeah, putting together a package like that, this tour, Tribulation, In Solitude, Watain, wow. It's one of those ones you look back on and are like, I'd kick myself in the ass for not being able to see something like that. And I won't be able to again, as far as I can tell.
Yep. I think in the touring world of the day, it's going to be interesting when these bands come from Europe or overseas, wherever. It's going to be a lot harder for maybe not where you're located to see bigger tours. Because Chicago's always been a pretty good hub for these larger tours.
Right.
Whereas maybe where I'm located, about 40 minutes north of Nashville, I mean, Nashville gets a lot of shows, but it's not ever going to get the larger tours like this. I don't want to say ever, but it very rarely gets larger tours like this because it's considered a different tier market. And I mean, why wouldn't you as a band want to play the larger markets to make the most money so you can continue to come back and continue to hone your craft?
Right.
And on another point of that is that Watain is probably never going to play Nashville for two big glowing reasons. Most of their lyrical concepts are theistic Satanism, occult, whatever, and their stage show, which sadly overshadows the band. I get how it could. We alluded to a show on that said tour package of Tribulation and In Solitude, where they played a venue in Brooklyn called the Bazaar, or Brooklyn Bazaar.
Yep.
And that's the show that TMZ reported on.
I remember this.
And the show, their stage show has always involved pigs' heads, cattle heads, you name it. There's also some strange rumors about maybe how they come by their blood on the tour.
They know a guy.
Yeah. There's a blood guy in every show or in every city, right?
Soup pig, bud.
At this venue in particular, for whatever reason, they were just like, we got a bucket of this stuff. They just started whipping it onto the crowd. And from what I gathered, some people were really stoked on it because it's like, it's this. And some people were just getting violently ill. And I'm assuming that some of the blood probably was not as fresh as it could be. And I'm sure the smell, which is known for this band, the smell apparently is violent. And I can only imagine how long it took to get the odor out of that venue.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been a fun one to clean up after. Like,
man.
I'm my shifts tonight. Who's playing? Watain. You know that pig bucket pig bucket band.
Oh, they're like Guar.
Yeah,
yeah,
why not?
Sure.
Yeah, I definitely remember this airing. I don't know if I had worked for the television station at this point, but I definitely remember this report because it's like, wait, what? Like Watain on TMZ? Why? For what reason? Oh, that's why.
Yeah,
interesting. Because I think I even remember you mentioned the stench. Like you could almost, it was hitting people outside of the venue. Even. Yeah. So black metal, man. What are you gonna do?
Hey, man. It's not the smell inside the venue or outside the venue that would have got me. This is extreme metal. They play questionable venues all the time.
Sure.
I've been on tour. I know what the cleaning issue can be. Sometimes you go days without a shower.
Ooh, yeah.
Could you imagine the smell of that bus? Could you, like, could you imagine? I'm sure they kept the stuff either in the trailer or in a compartment underneath the bus. And I'm sure this was a summer tour. Could you imagine opening up those containers? I mean, and that adds to the mythos of the band alone of like, they continuously go out and their shows are typically viewed as like a ritual for them. So they go out, they don the garb, they put on their gear, they put the war paint on, and they essentially go out there and put on this ritual. And could you imagine knowing like, I have to get this out of me so much that I'm willing to encompass myself in, you know, the viscera of animals or whatever. I mean, there's stories that I remember reading, and maybe even in there's a 2010 issue of Decibel that has Eric on the front. And I distinctly remember him talking about getting sicknesses from being covered in the blood.
I think I have that. He's literally covered in head to toe on the cover.
Yep.
What's the line? Bag of mashed up assholes.
Bag full of mashed up assholes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I had never considered that. I feel like, as a audience member, you don't often consider that.
Yeah.
You have to take stuff with you, and unfortunately, laundry is not always an accessible thing. I imagined like the scene in Tommy Boy, Chris Farley getting hosed down by Rob Lowe. Find the nearest Shell gas station, maybe a Love somewhere.
Yep.
Just
pay for one of those showers.
Ooh.
I mean, I have a mental image in my head, and I'm not trying to take the piss out on the band because I really enjoy this band a lot, but there's certain aspects of it that you have to look at and go like, this is a thing. I could imagine maybe a stagehand or a tour manager or something like that being out behind the bus with a water hose and a sprayer, just spraying off all the stage like clothes and stuff like that. Cause they're mainly wearing denim, bullet belts, leather, that sort of thing. And maybe a ripped up Gigi Allen shirt in there somewhere. Like, could you imagine? And they put out these records, and they put out arguably probably the largest record of their career. And they put it out, and they're going, we're going to back this as hard as we can. We're going to push it as hard as we can. And it comes out, and it's a 50-50 mix of who likes it as to who doesn't. And I'm sure the band deep down goes, it was a success. We did it. We pushed it to the very brink. And now they're considered one of, if not one of the top, I'd say top 10 black metal artists out there.
Yeah. I mean, following this release, you obviously have, obviously this was as I mentioned, this was the record that really got me into the band.
Absolutely.
And then Trident Wolf Eclipse from 2018, which another kind of big gap, considering was it an incredible record. Certainly very extreme. Then you have 2022's The Agony and Ecstasy of Watain. Both amazing records. I think I want to say Trident Wolf Eclipse was still on Century, and then that latest record is on Nuclear Blast.
Yep.
So again, I mean, you can't really complain about working with two labels like that.
Two labels with a lot of credentials and a lot of history in this world. I mean, Nuclear Blast and Century Media were known in the early 90s as helping put out some of the early death metal releases, some of the early black metal releases, Gothenburg releases, that sort of thing. I mean, those are two labels with great credentials. Matter of fact, I believe Tribulation was on Century Media for their Down Below record and maybe the most recent EP, whereas their last full-length, In Gloom, There Is No Sound, I believe is the title, was released through Metal Blade, which we could do a whole episode on Metal Blade records. But you can't complain. This band still has a lasting career. They can still go. They're still debuting in like the top 10 in Sweden. I think The Agony and Ecstasy was number 6. Like, they're still doing pretty well. They've still made a career for themselves. And I know when they still tour the States, it's a big deal. It is a massive deal when they come over here. And it's phenomenal that you get an album like this that maybe a lot of people just shrugged off as like this cash grab. And if you go back and listen to it, it's amazing. Those same people that hated on that record can love The Satanist that came out a few months later. And some of those fans, like you and I in particular, can go back and listen to Sunbather, and we can see all the different roots of where those bands drew their influences from. Some maybe are a little more traditional metal, some maybe a little more post-rock even. But it all has this overarching vibe of a black metal kind of sound. And this album is no different. This album is a black metal album. Yes, they drew from different influences for it, but this is a black metal record through and through. The first 3 tracks are a note of that.
You summed it up perfectly. 10 Years On, The Wild Hunt. I think you should certainly listen to it if you missed it. If maybe you had a different opinion than we did, I highly recommend just revisiting this record and really sitting with it. Perhaps your feelings may change. And if you love it, you can always go back to it. This is a really crowning achievement of this band's discography, a step in the right direction, in my opinion. Like I said, I can't say it enough. The songwriting on here is impeccable. There are layers. There are just really not a lot of even repeating parts. Everything is just so crafted in such a way where, yes, the songs are longer, but they don't overstay their welcome. Everything is really just so engaging and is such a fun listen. So, happy birthday, I guess, to The Wild Hunt.
Yep.
Congratulations on the continued success of this band. I hope to hear more from them in the future.
Agreed. The last record came out a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. I would love to see where the band is going in the future. It would be absolutely great. I do want to add, and I should have brought this up earlier. The first time I heard the title The Wild Hunt was a Hellboy comic. It was based off the story of The Wild Hunt.
No kidding. Okay.
Yep.
I'm not familiar.
So yeah, that's kind of a tidbit there, but we're just kind of segue into this, bud. What are you listening to this week?
Oh boy. Well, it has been a long time, and I maybe am not familiar with the happenings of this band over the past few years. I honestly thought they were done. But Krieg, we're talking about black metal. They put out a new song, Solitarily a Future Renounced. This is going to be off of an upcoming release titled Ruiner through Profound Lore Records. Obviously we've been talking about Decibel. Neil Jameson has been a contributor to that magazine for a very long time. I will often read his kind of articles or blurbs about various topic. It's great, man. I was a really big fan of Transient. I remember I think that was the first record, kind of a year after the album we're talking about, The Wild Hunt. It was in 2014.
That might have been the most recent record.
Actually, I think you're right, because the other releases by this band are a collab with The Body from 2015, and then they had a split with Integrity in 2018.
That's right.
So I believe that is correct. That is the last record that the band put out, and I was a huge fan of it. It combines elements of noise. It is really kind of the theme of this episode. Really is taking that influence of black metal and doing something different with it, challenging your songwriting capabilities. So I'm a really big fan of this new single. Ruiner is going to be out on Profound Lore on October 15th. You can check out that single now. Some other music I've been listening to. There's the new Body Void single that came out, Flesh Market. That new album, Atrocity Machine, also going to be out through Prosthetic Records. Let's see, what else have I been listening to? Desolation's Flower, which is the title track from the new Regana record, also the Flenser. So there's like a lot of new music, some elements of like black metal, some doom, some post metal, I would say. Definitely check those out. Dylan, what have you been listening to?
So the big one that I've been listening to is the death metal band Afterbirth from New York finally put out a new single after about 3 years. I discovered them in during the pandemic off their album Four Dimensional Flesh. This new record, the track is called Tightening the Screws, that dropped. It's going to come out on Willowtip Records, which we've touched on in the podcast as well. That track is something else. The vocalist was in Artificial Brain for a period of time. I believe the bass player in this band is in Helmet.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But this is a really cool band. Definitely in the more technical and weirder side of death metal. And, getting a track like this after 3 years was just, I've been waiting on this thing for a long time. So really looking forward to that. Let's see. The Dying Fetus has a new album on Relapse Records called Make Them Beg for Death. That'll be coming out pretty soon. They just dropped a new track called Throw Them in the Van.
Yeah.
It's like a minute and a half, minute 45 long. It's almost long enough that you go, wait, is it over? Like, it's just a great, great track. And I'll say this as a non-metal listen, the newest Tyler Childers single, In Your Love, off his his up and coming album, Rustin' in the Rain, has been on constant spin as well.
All right, that's what we've been listening to this week. Thank you so much for tuning into Riff Worship. You can always follow us at Distortion891 for all updates on the show. Suggest, is there an album or riff that we should talk about? Let us know. You can comment on this episode. We are on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube, so you can always watch us there. I always thought of myself as having a face for radio, but I guess we're YouTubers now, so you can follow us there as well. Riff Worship Pod. We'll be back next week. We got a very surprised guest. We're going to be traveling to the old Sweden. We've been talking about this guy a long time. You and I, as friends, there's one night in particular, oh my God, we just blew through the entire discography, but we'll stay tuned for that. It's going to be a fun one. We got some fun stuff in the works. So see you next week on Riff Worship.